when I talk about viruses, I don't mean memes or computer viruses. I mean these beasts, the Ebola, the AIDS, the flu, and a lot more. And this idea came to me because currently our scientists are pretty busy explaining the world in a few simple rules. And we're finding out that we can summarize the way our universe works and behaves in a few simple rules. And in terms of creativity, we have a lot of individual examples. We have a lot of artists who explain what their creative process is and how they come up with ideas. But I haven't come across so far a global theory of creativity. And when pondering on this, I realized that, first of all, that theory must already exist and must already apply to something else, and is probably a lot simpler than we think. So I went on around and explored virology, which seemed to me a pretty good model. And first of all, I would like you to think of viruses not as the bad guys, although I did start by talking about Ebola, but thinking of them as good guys. So viruses are everywhere. They're in the air we breathe, on the soil we walk on the water we drink. And the good news is about 90% of them are either innocuous or good for us. The bad guys, the pathogens that make us sick or kill us, are only about 10% of those. And even those 10%, our immune system is pretty good at beating them down. So they've been good for us for over 40 million years, and we know this date because we have traced back some viral material in our DNA up to 40 million years back. Within our bodies is up to 8% of viral material, which, you know, some of it has transcended and is just baggage, but there's probably a value for a body to keep these going so long. So now let's look quickly at a creative definition, and I'm using the Sternberg and Lubert definition, which is based in the context. It's all about the ability to produce work that is novel and appropriate, and is based in the context around you. So if I summarize this and look as an example, you know, creativity has been around for at least 30,000 years. The Chauvet grotto, somebody had the idea of using the red pigment around, blow it on the wall, and leave a trace, therefore manipulating their environment, creating something novel. So this is art, which some people see as non-essential to the survival of the species and therefore a form of trash. But keep that word trash in mind, we'll come back to it later. To summarize the creative cycle, really roughly, we can say you observe the environment around you, you ponder on it, an internal mechanism, and you produce a variant. Now this is something that is very, very difficult to observe. You can't put in the Petri dish and under a microscope. They're trying at the moment to put people in RMs and under scanners, but that is not a normal environment. So I thought about looking at viruses which can go under microscopes to get a bit more. So let's just give you another example very quickly of the creative cycle in practice. Velázquez painted Las Meninas. Pablo Picasso came around, looked at it, and then in the summer of 1958 produced a series of 58 variants of this, demonstrating clearly I looked, I pondered, and I produced the whole cycle. Now, let's go to virology, and I'm going to give you a really basic version. It's virology 001. And the first thing you have to think of is that viruses start with a particle called a virion. I'm raising my hand and saying I am not stating there is a creative particle, the next Higgs boson, but follow me there. That virion enters your body and then targets a cell. Now, cells are complex organisms. There's a lot of things happening in a cell. There's a Golgi apparatus, there's some DNA, some RNA, but what you can really think of cells as is a factory. It produces stuff. And the virion is going to go to that factory and use its manufacturing capacity to replicate and produce more and more copies of itself. Now, I've put 3 because I was lacking space, but you've got to go imagine tens of thousands. We're talking really big numbers with viruses. And basically, if we summarize the viral cycle, we have this. It enters a cell, it overtakes the cell, hijacks it, to replicate, exits, and put that on repeat until you've hijacked all the cell you can, or the immune systems beat you down. There's one more thing to this, and that's the wait time. And viruses, which are one of the earliest life form on Earth, and not the earliest, and which will probably be the last form of life on Earth, have incorporated this wait time. So if this super efficient life form has a wait time, we might well stop and think about it. And by wait time, we mean the time between the moment a virion enters an organism and the organism actually gets sick. The longest time that's been measured for virus is about 40 years. So there is a virus out there that hibernates for about 40 years before becoming active. The flu is about 3 days. But there is, as part of the cycle, a time during which the virus is not active, during which it's not replicating, during which it's not overtaking the system. And that's not the time that we don't see the results. It's the time there's actually nothing happening. Time is a part of it. So if we go back to our creative cycle, observe, ponder, and produce, and we just do a small variations and transform observe into let the world enter you, and we transform ponder into process the information that has entered, and transform this into let the result exit, you start seeing how well it maps. Now, if the waiting time is essential for viruses, I'm postulating that it's also essentials for us, which means that the first bad news is, when people say, oh, I've got a creative drought and I can't get it running. Well, I think it's part of the process. I think it's absolutely part of the creative cycle to hit those waiting times, to hit those droughts. And trying to remove them will only kill the process, not increase your creativity. But let's continue. 1917, Spanish influenza, 17 million deaths worldwide. Statistically, all it took was one virion particle. So let's see how it's a numbers game for viruses, because it wasn't really one virion to start it at all. First of all, when one virion enters an organism, it needs to find a specific cell. Of all the cells in your body, it needs a really specific one. So for example, HIV needs your lymphocyte T4s. Then on that cell, it's going to look for some specific doors, which are called receptors, which the cell should have, but then your cell may be deficient, and those receptors may be closed or absent, and the cell is called resistant. Then finally, that cell needs to work. The manufacturer needs to be capable of doing the reproduction work. So you can start seeing, well, it's all about really big numbers. And this is, I think, the next big lesson. Viruses are efficient because it's about huge numbers in. You get a lot of variance inside an organism to increment the changes statistically of hitting cells, and then they produce huge numbers out as well. So if that's what viruses do, then that means for creativity, let's get huge numbers in and expose yourself to as much as you can. So in particular, vary what you look at. If you usually get inspired by your coffee shop and one day you hit a drought, well, go to another coffee shop or go to a museum. If you get inspired by paintings, try statues, try another country, try a different TV channel. Just expose yourself to as much as you can so that you outpour as much as you can. But let's continue this. We looked at replication mechanism, which is what viruses do. They replicate. The replication is what makes you sick. Remember, they've hijacked the cell. Now, hijacking one cell is not going to affect your body. Hijacking 10 or 100 is not going to do. But when you start hijacking 10 or 20% of an organ, that's when people get sick. But until you get there, all the viruses is doing is taking the cell. And while using the cell as a manufacturer, they're a little bit mutating because they are using, it's like a manufacturer that also employs nuts. Your element gets contaminated. And as part of the mutation, you get errors. Now, some viruses produce tremendous amounts of trash, a tremendous amount of errors, up to 90% when they mutate. And there's research going on at the moment to see if these mutations, these erroneous mutations, are actually deliberate or not. And there's a suspicion they're not. There's a suspicion it's actually very deliberate from the virus to create a lot of trash, in particular to drown the immune system. And that way, the immune system is super busy taking care of those 90% of anyway useless virions, while the 10% that are super powerful continue replicating themselves at a slower pace, really in disguise, and by the time they've hijacked 10-20% of the organ, the immune system can't beat it anymore. So that's ongoing research. The trash has value. There's a strong suspicion trash has value with viruses. Another example is the herpes virus that 80-90% of people suffer from. Well, as you may know, you get herpes the one day you get the chicken pox as a kid, and then the virus stays dormant. It will never leave your body. It will stay there forever. It may never show up again, or it may as shingles or as cold sores, which are two different manifestations of exactly the same viruses. Now, we don't know why the virus pops up again, but what we do know is that for that virus to stay dormant within the organism, there is probably a value to that virus. And again, this is ongoing research in virology with the suspicion that the virus is kept in because it has value, and it could well be that it keeps the immune system ticking and ongoing, a bit like the little lighter lamp on your guy's boiler. So again, ongoing research, but strong suspicion, dormancy or keeping the viruses is good, the trash is good. So this is our next lesson. The trash has worth. Viruses tell us that, which means that the creative output that we disregard, that we think has no value, could well have value, if only to get out and free the factory for more creative process. And now, let me tell you a bit about the speed. So 102 miles per hour is the fastest recorded speed of a sneeze. I don't know if any of you read Seth Godin's book, The Ideas Virus, but he qualify some people as sneezers. They're the high influencers. They're people with a lot of network who, when they say something, people listen and obey. They're the Oprah of this world. When Oprah likes a product, that business quadrillionates its bottom line within weeks. The sneezers are few, but they're very, very powerful. And just like viruses use sneezing, a very simple but very efficient mechanism to disperse themselves, then I recommend that we try looking at those behaviors and be a bit like the kid who wants to get infected and sticks by his baby brother so that he doesn't go to school the next day. Or rather, go and sneeze around. So don't always protect yourself with trademarks and copyright and start locking your work down, actually to enhance creativity in others so that it comes around to you. Well, sneeze out, spread it out, send your work out there, let it roll out, put creative outputs in odd places so that they may inspire somebody else and that you spread around the wonderful gift that is creativity. So that's about it. 4 small points, but that pretty much tell us that there are lessons from viruses. And if anybody would like to take this idea and put it through a PhD to really validate it, it's all yours.